Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening for the third talk in our Making the Past Our Present series, which is delivered by members of the Irish Baroque Orchestra in partnership with the National Concert Hall. As with the talks in the series so far, there will be a Q&A session at the end, so please do submit your questions using the comment and chat functions. We'll get through as many as we can in the time available to us. Our guest for this evening's talk is IBO violinist Marja Gaynor. Marja works with the Helsinki Baroque Orchestra and other leading European period orchestras alongside the IBO, and also has established a profile in Ireland as a trad player. Her open-hearted musicianship means that she's very much in demand as a teacher, a workshop leader, and a chamber musician, and she recently appeared with the Vanbrugh as part of the NCH Spring-Summer Variation series. As with the other speakers in this series, she takes to the NCH stage on June the 10th, with IBO and soprano Aisling Kenny in a programme of two extraordinary cantatas by Bach and a sonata for orchestra by Handel. I'm delighted that she's here with us this evening. Marja, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Alia. Nice to be here. So, what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to share with you some of the sources, sort of from the borderline between folk music and Baroque music. Very interesting little fringe. And I'm going to play some of my favourite bits and bobs from these sources. I'll talk a little bit about them, and I'm going to talk a little bit about ornamentation and articulation and things, little cheaty methods. How can we make one sound like the other, or the other one sound like the other? How can we Baroquecize or make traditional pieces sound more classical, or vice versa? So it should be pretty fun. So I'm very excited to talk about some of my favorite things. But before I launch into all that, I thought that I should just give a little speech about how I got into all things non-classical. I come from a very classical music family. Both my parents were music teachers, and traditional music didn't really play any part in our upbringing, apart from Finnish lullabies sung at night time and that kind of thing. We never had the radio on. My knowledge of pop music still is minuscule. But I think what it all boils down to, how it all started, was when I was about 15, there was a boy in my class called Matti. Nothing romantic there. I think both our parents were a bit disappointed. But Matti played the accordion. An accordion is a massive thing in Finland. Lots of people play the accordion. And it's not just kind of like a small button accordion for trad things. Usually people do it to a high standard, and they might be classically quite handy as well. People play classical music on the accordion. Or then they use it reading from the chords and melody to play waltzes and tangos, big thing in Finland, waltzes and tangos, that kind of thing. So Matti was a very good accordionist, and I don't know how it started exactly. Must have been like somebody's mother's 50th birthday party, but I think one of the parents had this idea that me and Matti should form a duo for the event and play music on the background. So there's a series of books in Finland called Suuri toivelaulukirja, the Great Book of Popular Tunes. I think there's like, I don't know, at the time maybe 20 big domes of these popular melodies, and they always feature the tune with lyrics if it's a song, and the chord. So it might have the melody, the words, C major, A minor, that kind of thing. So we copied a few of these tunes, waltzes and tangos mainly, made little gig folders, and off we went to somebody's mom's 50th. So we played. It was grand. We maybe got, I don't know, equivalent of a fiver and a piece of cake. And then it became this thing that for the next 2 or 3 years we just played at the opening of an envelope all over the place. And of course by the second or third gig we were bored stiff of these pieces. So we just started doing whatever we wanted with them. So I might play the melody, then he might play the melody, and I would try to do something on the background. So we just messed around, and I think there's a little link in all this into some of the repertoire from 17th, 18th century I'll talk about later on. And I think we were also in this very long tradition of musicians for centuries, basically just doing whatever we wanted with music. Nobody really cared, and maybe sometimes it happened if you did some very fancy little fast bit somewhere that somebody might turn away from their cup of coffee and piece of cake going, oh, that was really interesting, fair play. So maybe at the back of my mind there was always this little thing of, I want to impress them, I want to make them listen. And this of course ties quite well into the Baroque idea of you want to impress the audience, you make them to feel something, you want to keep them the edge of your seat. So I think that's kind of how it started. So ever since those years of playing the waltzes and the tangos, I've had no fear whatsoever of just making stuff up if I've got some kind of structure of chords and a melody. No, nothing jazzy now. They have to be like C major and A minor along those lines, but I can make stuff up, no hassle. Then when I was in college, I was lucky enough to get to play in the backing band for a really good Finnish folk dance group. The musicians were very good. We always used sheet music, but we kind of arranged it together and it was quite nice. So I had a little touch to the Finnish trad as well. Now, I hope the Finns will forgive me if I say that I think all the best tunes were always either Swedish or then from the kind of Russian east border. Finnish instrumental trad can be a little bit samey. Songs are a different matter. So the one thing I took away from playing Finnish trad with dancers was it has to be danceable. It has to be steady. You can't speed it up, you can't slow it down. And this of course again ties very well into a lot of Baroque repertoire, because so much of 17th, 18th century music is based on different dance forms. So I think it's something we are often aware as Baroque musicians, or should be aware. I definitely personally should know my Baroque dances better. Then my first touch into Irish trad happened, I think this is about 1995. My mum sang in a choir, a ladies' choir, and they were down a singer or something. So I got to go with them to Budapest in Hungary. So there we went singing stuff. And one night we were in a restaurant or a pub or cafe, I can't remember. And in the corner, I don't think they were Irish, but they were definitely playing Irish music. And I had never heard anything like this. And I was mesmerized. I thought this is absolutely wonderful. I really want to learn this music. So then when I was in college, I used to go into an Irish session. This was in a town called Lahti, where I did my undergraduate, and there was a pub probably called Molly Malone's, like they all are, and there was an American-Irish fella called Keith, who played the uilleann pipes, and he used to run this session. I think it was every Tuesday night or something. So we had these folders full of jigs and reels, and we played, and it was good fun. It was we all tried our best to kind of play them as well as we could, but like, there was no right or wrong. We had this dream that we'd actually do a trip to Ireland, do a bit of fundraising and actually go to Ireland and actually really try to play all the stuff. So then I came to Cork on my Erasmus, so this is 2000. And I had this idea that folk music is this lovely, relaxed thing where people kind of have a jam together. So I sailed into my first session and I think I got stared out in about half an hour. I had no idea that there's all these rules and etiquette, and you can't just go in and blast the stuff out, that you actually really, really have to know the tunes. And if you don't know the tunes, just don't play the tunes, or play very, very quietly. And definitely don't start playing a tune unless you get asked to. So I kind of learned the hard way that, like, for instance, things like there's somebody in charge of the thing, and unless he or she says, oh, would you like to give us a tune? You don't just start randomly playing. You don't do funny harmonies. You don't do any silly, frilly bits. And each tune gets played X number of times. And then each set has like X number of tunes. And then you give subtle little nod or look when you're about to change from one thing to another. And when the next tune starts, you kind of listen carefully for a few bars and then you come in. Most of all, you just have to really, really know the stuff. Especially if you play a melody instrument. So I was a little bit put off. Then I did find a friendly session eventually in a pub called the Chiné in Cork, which had wonderful musicians. There would still be the odd purist who'd kind of make some funny comments if you were doing funny harmonies, but then a lot of them were very good. And I thought it was a wonderful thing that like they would allow all us Johnny foreigners to come in, and then they'd say, oh, let's hear something from Finland, whatever. And sometimes it happened that somebody would come in and play a good tune and everybody join in, and then you'd go back a few weeks later and they would have actually kind of taken over the tune and they'd do different versions even though the visiting musician was long gone. And I thought, this is wonderful, this is actually a real proper living tradition. But I think you mentioned in the introduction that I've established myself as a trad player. Definitely not true. I've dabbled at it a tiny bit over the years, but I still don't know many tunes. But I think I can kind of try and make up the style a little bit when I play stuff. And what happened then? So I got into Baroque. It's a very long story, but it's mainly thanks to my wonderful old teacher, Mr. Adrian Petku, who used to teach me in Cork. I came back to Cork because I was already a little bit in love with my darling now husband. So I came back to stalk him gently and was kind of wasting time around the place, working in a bookshop and playing with bands. And Mr. Petku said, come on now, come back to college. And I remember you liked playing Baroque. So we'll give you the Baroque violin of the Cork School of Music and we'll get you lessons. And that's kind of how I got back into it. I was always mad about the recordings of Andrew Manse. I thought, this is brilliant, he's doing all these ornaments and he can do anything at all. So again, this kind of impressive, flamboyant, free style really spoke to me. So then I did my master's half and half on Baroque and Modern in Cork. And then I went to The Hague. So a little bit like sailing into the session, I sailed into my first violin lesson and probably played some folksy thing with lots of ornaments. And my teacher, Mr. Pablo Besnosuk, said, right, okay, let's just stop doing these ornaments. Let's just not do any of that. Just stop it and let's go back to basics and let's try and make a nice sound and learn to play the gut strings and how to use the bow. And so that was the end of the ornaments for a while. But it was a wonderful scene. I think there's something about Baroque musicians that you're just always gonna feel at home if you're a nice person interested in nice music and playing together well. I guess like with any chamber music, you're in the room with people you might not necessarily know well, but everybody's ears are wide open and you're really trying to make it speak and make it be groovy and fun. So that's how I got into Baroque and that's what I'm still doing. But I think I'll launch into my part called The Sources. So the first source I'm going to talk about is called the Hibernian Muse. And it was a little bit hard to find an exact date for it. It's published in London. It said somewhere that it's from the 1770s, but my teeny bit of Googling detecting work shows that it has to be a little bit later because there's mentions of different plays and ballad operas that weren't published until 1780s. So I'm going to call it 1787. I saw it mentioned somewhere. So the full title of the book is Hibernian Muse, a collection of Irish airs, including the most favourite compositions of Carolan, the celebrated Irish bard. So that's the title. And I think it would be very difficult to talk about Irish traditional music and Baroque without mentioning Carolan, at least briefly, because he really is the man. So he was, as many of you would know, the famous blind Irish harpist. He lived 1670 till 1738 and was much celebrated already in his lifetime. He didn't write anything down himself, as far as I know, but many other people already during his lifetime wrote down his pieces. And talking of writing down things, there's 3 reasons why I chose the Hibernian Muse to talk about. First of all, because anybody can access it. It's on imslb.org. It's a nice, easy to read edition. All the big hits are in it, as I'll call them out in a second. And third wise, really interestingly, whoever wrote this down, it could be Thompson's, the publishers, but I don't know exactly, it doesn't mention who wrote them down. But they didn't just write down the melody, they also gave it a bass line. And I've found this immensely useful doing arrangements. I know it's a little bit late for Baroque 1780s, but it's not a million miles off either. And the harmonies are simple. I'd say they used probably mostly harpists as sources, since they have the bass line, unless they just completely made it up and just listened to a fiddle player. Also possible. But back to O'Carolan, there's the really charming, lovely story, which might or might not be true, that he met up with Geminiani, who was the famous Italian composer violinist living in Ireland on and off. And according to the story, they had a bit of a jam together and played for each other, were much impressed by one another, and O'Carolan wrote, according to this legend, the famous Carolan's Concerto after meeting Geminiani. I hope it's true. I think it's a lovely story, and I think in O'Carolan's style there's definitely a little tinge of classical music, if you like. So I'll just call out a few of the pieces that feature in the Hibernian Muse. There's Eileen Aroon, which was of course hugely popular. So many people wrote their different arrangements of it. There's Carolan's Concerto, even though in the Hibernian Muse it goes by the name Mrs. Power, spelled P-O-E-R, and it's quite a different. Well, it's you can recognize the tune, but I think it's very harpy. It's got lots of funny leaps and you wouldn't be able to play it on the violin as it is in the book. There is Lily Bolero, which is attributed to Purcell. I don't know, could or could not. I've got a feeling it's just a traditional tune. There's Dami Himanum, or Give Me Your Hand, or Tour d'Alo, which I've played on so many wedding gigs for the what's it called? Sign of peace. So people shake hands and you play. Dun, da, 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 dun, dun, da, 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 da. There's also a very simple version of Chroma Cremoli, which of course features as a fancy oboe version on our new IBO CD. Those are just a few. And the first piece I'm going to play for you tonight is another piece from the Hibernian Muse called the Coulomb. And lots of people would know Coulomb as one of the Irish violin pieces. Slow, beautiful air. And I'm going to play it exactly as it is. So circa 1787. Before I play it, I'll have to share with you where I first heard it. So when I first came to Cork, there's some famous old hotel in Cork called the Imperial Hotel that used to have a very old-fashioned fancy restaurant. So a boy in my class, in my Erasmus class, or young one I should say, Mick Cummins, had a regular gig in the Imperial Hotel restaurant every Saturday night. There was a gentleman called Dennis Desmond who used to play this grand piano, and Mick Cummins played with him, and they decided it would be nice to have another violin, and Mick said, come on, let's play. There was no gig folders on this one, but it was kind of movies and musicals, kind of genteel background music. But Michael would also play all the famous Irish tunes, so there'd be the Marina Waltz, and there'd definitely be the Coulomb every night. So I learned it first by just listening to Mick play the Coulomb, and of course every fiddler does their own version. A lot of classical players play this as well. But I'm going to play this exactly as it is in 1878. The way, I mean, this is probably not how the person played it, but this is how somebody writing it down in the late 18th century wrote it down. I'm just going to have a little tune. Got a brand new E string, I just broke one. So here's the Coulomb. I'm not going to add anything and I'm not going to take anything away, just as it is. Coulomb from 18th century. Now, apart from all these famous tunes, in the Hibernian Muse, we have, let me just get my bits and bobs ready. Lots of faster tunes, a lot of them in 6/8. I was trying to do a little bit of research into the history of jig, but I'll have to research harder. I think one could safely say that it's been around in Ireland and Britain from 17th century onwards. Maybe somebody in the comments has more insights into this. It became very popular in continental Europe with Baroque composers as the last movement of a suite or a sonata. So it's like a lively, dancey ending for a piece. And jig is usually in 6/8, I suppose. And there's lots of tunes in the Hibernian Muse that look to me like jigs. Some of them are still played. And very charmingly, I think very interestingly, a lot of them mention the play or ballad opera that they were used in. And actually, when I looked into this a little bit for the speech, I was thinking, God, I can really see why Peter is so excited of 18th century repertoire in Ireland. Because if you look into this ballad opera, for instance, it just seems there was so much of all these wonderful theatre productions happening. And it just seemed like a genre where the folk and the art music really mingled very happily together in a very crowd-pleasing way, and everybody would probably sing these or play these tunes and sing the songs all over the streets of Dublin, London, wherever. And so some of the plays or ballad operas that get listed as where the tune comes from in the Hibernian Muse are, I'll just call out a few. The most famous is, of course, Beggar's Opera. So, for instance, I think Lily Bolero was used in that one, but that's, of course, the big hit. That's from 1720s. The other titles of the ballad operas are The Poor Soldier, Robin Hood. I really want to see a remake of Robin Hood, the ballad opera. Love in a Camp, and Love in a Village. And I especially got excited about the Love in a Village. It lists Thomas Arne, A-R-N-E, as the composer, but actually he only wrote 4 of the, 30-odd numbers in it. A lot of it was just folk melodies and also arias by Giordani and Geminiani, both of whom have, of course, a massive Irish connection, being based in Dublin for some of the time. So, can we get funding for the IBO to redo Love in the Village, conducted by Peter? So the jig I'm going to play next comes from Love in a Village, and it's called St. Patrick's Day. I chose this one because it seems to be still in the contemporary repertoire, so it goes to show how nicely music has been going strong since 18th century to present day. And not only will I play the jig called St. Patrick's Day, I'm also going to play a jig by Corelli. And I chose Corelli because his collection of sonatas from 1700 for the violin were absolutely massively influential, and I'm sure that people in Ireland would have heard and played them. I hope, I'd say O'Carolan would have heard Corelli pieces as well. He was really top of the pops. So I'm going to play St. Patrick's Day jig and a Corelli jig, but I'm not going to tell you which one I'll do first, and I'm going to do both of them twice. I'm going to do whichever I'll do first as a classical version, and then I'll do a trad version. Then I'll go to the other and do the same. I'll play it classically or baroquely and then tradially. And then I'll talk afterwards what I did different and how anybody who plays the violin can really do it. So I'll do another little tune. So here's piece number 1. number 2. So, you probably guessed that the second piece was the Corelli jig. So, I should probably mention at this stage that a lot of Irish traditional musicians find Baroque bow quite nice for playing trad. I guess because it's light and nimble, and people generally, in my humble experience watching trad players, people use very little bow, which is also one of the first things I'll tell my students to do on the Baroque bow. People coming from classical modern violin background, I always tell them to use kind of concentrated, nice slow bow to make the best sound out of the slowly speaking, squeaky gut strings. So I suppose the first thing to do to make a classical jig, if you like, to sound more traditional, is instead of playing straight, you jiggidize the rhythm. That's one thing. A very general comment in Baroque music, or I suppose classical music in general, we try to use a lot of different kind of articulation. So we might play legato. In the Corelli jig, there's lots of written in slurs. When we slur in traditional style, I think in a jig you often slur the third and fourth note together, or notes 6 to 7, so and of course in classical Baroque music especially, we try to do a lot of light and shade, lots of shape, so the music is always going somewhere or coming back from somewhere, and we go loud and we go soft and we try to surprise the audience. I took a few trad lessons from Johnny McCarthy, the great Corkonian trad fiddle player and teacher in Cork School of Music, and he told me straight away, he said, don't do loud and soft, doesn't happen here, no. So I guess playing trad, you make it interesting with subtle variation of the ornamentation. Actually, people do amazing things decorating trad music, and they never play the same tune twice the same way, really. But I guess that's what makes it interesting, also this kind of rhythmical drive and general excitement, but no dynamics as far as I know. To talk to you briefly through ornaments, I know in Baroque music, theoretically, there's a gazillion million ornaments. You look at Couperin treatise, there's like, I don't know, all kinds of fancy twiddly bits, but in real life, as a Baroque orchestral musician, I think what we do is a trill. So we can either do a trill on the note or above, and then we might do a turn, or I think that's as fancy as we get in an orchestra, or we might do a mordent. So you play the note and go under it. And at this stage I have to thank my colleague in Cork School of Music, Idel Sullivan, who confirmed my suspicion that in trad the main ornaments are, I think it's called a cut, just a teensy little flick of a finger. I think when I was playing the jig, I was using it a lot if there's two notes that are the same, like instead of going, I think I went. So I slur note number 3 to 4 with the little cut in the middle. Already gives it a nice feeling. There's also a passage in the chorale that I played that immediately sounds Stradi if instead of going, you can do the little cut there with the slur. Whoops. And the other tradi ornament, I think, is the roll, which is quite interesting. I would never do this in classical music. So here's my main note. And I'm going to call it a dotted crotchet. Often you can also replace 3 quavers as a dotted crotchet and a roll. I did that a lot when I did my tradi versions of the tunes. So you go over the note, back to the note, under the note, and back to the note in slow motion. And curiously, if the note is on this is very violinistic now, but if I'm doing the first finger note, I wouldn't go, I would always use my 3rd finger. So then when I do it up to speed. And the 3rd tradi ornament that I didn't do in these jigs is, I think it's called a treble, it probably has many names, and it's this crunchy triplet with the bow. It maybe possibly gets used in jigs as well, but I would use it in a reel, like. Quite a nice ornament. I think we should try introduce it to some Baroque pieces as well. In Baroque we don't generally do that kind of ornaments with the bow, but we use our bow creatively other ways. So I think that's me done with the Hibernian Muse for a while. The next source I'm going to talk about is, I think, my absolute favorite. I've used it so much over the years. It's the collection of books called the Division-Violin. And the first Division-Violin book was published in 1684 by a music publisher in London called Playford. And it seems to have been incredibly successful. He also published a treatise in 1651, I think, called English Dancing Master. And that was also hugely successful. So there was many spin-offs of that and of the Division-Violin. There was also Division Flute, which recycled a lot of the same tunes. So this comes from a time when they had all these Italian virtuosos arriving in the scene in London and elsewhere, and violin became a nice thing for gentlemen to do as a nice hobby. So I think the Division-Violin very much catered for this purpose. So let's say you were a gentleman who played the violin, possibly even quite well. So in the Division-Violin book, a little bit like the books we used with my accordionist friend in the 1990s, it would give you the tune, it would give you the chords, or rather the bass line to go with the tune, and then it gave you lots of nice variations, which were known as divisions at the time. So you get the real big hits of whatever was in vogue, and then all these nice things to do with them. And I think with early Baroque repertoire, it's often like you're kind of in a band. You choose your bandmates, you choose who you want to play with, you see what instruments you could use, and for this kind of repertoire you could have whatever you had handy. If you were lucky enough to have access to a keyboard, you could use that, or you could ask another violinist to play the chords for you, play the bass line. Maybe you had a friend who played the bass or the cello. Baroque guitar would have been insanely useful. Maybe somebody was, I don't know, playing a bit of percussion or whatever. So music for fun, music to amuse yourself. Some of the divisions are actually very virtuosic. We get the odd solo piece as well. Not all of them are easy. But I've used this source a lot. Again, on imslb.org we get several different editions of the Division-Violin. Little bit of Irish interest. There's, for instance, Farnells Ground. Tollett would have been an Irish composer. It's also known as Irish Ground. How does it go again? I can't remember. It's in F major. I had never come across it before, but it's on the last page of one of the Division-Violins on IMSLP. There was a big, very densely written page, and on top it said, The Black Joke, spelled Joak, as 'tis played in Dublin. And I thought, oh, I'll have to look it up. I wonder what it is. If anybody wants to Google the Black Joak, it seems to have been a bawdy popular song. Very popular, very bawdy. In case there's any children or people of delicate disposition listening, I'm not going to go into detail of what it actually was, but something a bit risque, I believe. I'm not going to play that one today. There was so much choice of what I could play from the Division-Violin. My absolute favourite is the variations on the folk song John Come Kiss Me by a composer called Thomas Baltzar, who was a really virtuosic violinist. But that's already on YouTube. Is it on the IBO player as well? Maybe not. But there's a version of me and my cellist friend Ifani Kakliak playing John Come Kiss Me. So I'm not going to play that one. There was also... Yeah, I had a hard time choosing what I played. There's Greensleeves, which was, of course, a big hit, still going strong centuries later. It was composed and still, of course, popular today. There's pieces by Lully. There's lots of pieces by Purcell. There's lots and lots of pieces by anonymous composers. Many of them very good. I'm gonna play one of my old favorites, if I can find the second page of it. This one is called Paul Steeple, or the Duke of Norfolk. So, like all of these, it's got the melody, and it's got the bass line, and then it has lots of variations. I'm sorry I don't have a friend here to play with me today, so you'll just have to imagine the bass line on the bottom. But I thought I'd play the round of chords once, and I'll hum the melody on top so you can hear how it sounds with the chords, and then you'll have to imagine it for the rest of the tune. Once the tune gets going, so you hear the melody, then there's all kinds of hopping around variations, getting faster and faster. Then it goes into sort of a jiggy, pastoral, that's the way I hear it anyways, 12/8, and then the tune comes back with the bang, with big chords at the end. So, long title of this is Paul Steeple, or the Duke of Norfolk, a second division of the same ground. It seems to have been a big hit at the time, because I think many of the Division-Violin editions feature at least 2 versions of it, so I'm not the only one who thinks it's a good tune. called Steeple, or the Duke of Norfolk. Nice filler for a concert program if there's been awfully serious stuff and you want to just get the audience to go, oh, that was nice. Another piece that features in all the Division-Violin books is Farnells Ground. And this would have been Eurovision winner every year for many, many years. I was again trying to do a little bit of research into the La Folia theme that the Farnells Ground essentially is. It's like the best I got was Portugal a couple of centuries before the Baroque era. Maybe somebody has more insights into this, but it made its way into all corners of Europe. And just to demonstrate, it even made it, sorry Finland, to the backwaters. Culturally, it really would have been backwaters, Finland at the time. So there isn't that many early Finnish trad collections, but there was a tailor called Samuel Rinta-Nikkola, kind of a self-learned man who wrote down, I think, collection of 59 polskas in 1809. So again, a little bit late for Baroque era, but he mentions in this collection that these are old tunes. And lo and behold, amongst all these polskas, polska being the most popular form of Scandinavian Finnish instrumental trad at the time, in the middle of all these polskas is the Farnells Ground, with under the name Sheep's Polska or Lampan Polska. And usually polskas sound a bit like something like that. So we get variations of the La Folia in that kind of spirit. It's not very long. This is the last item I'll play tonight. I think it's the only piece in this collection that has lyrics as well as the musical notes. So the lyrics of the piece, to go with the tune, the simple tune at the start, roughly translated say 1, 2, 3, 4. Let one be merry when sorrow comes. Let him go. Horseflies are singing. 4 mice are hopping around. The cat beats the drum and the whole world is making a big racket. So I'm gonna try sing the tune. The lyrics don't go very well with the melody, but I'll do it anyways. And then I'll play the 3 sets of variations. It's not very long, so enjoy. So this is Lampan Polska, a Finnish version of La Folia from notated in 1809, but probably a little bit older. Yksi, kaksi, kolme, neljä. Anna iloinen olla, kun suru tulee. Anna hänen mennä. Varmat ne laulaa, 4 hiirtä hyppelee. Kissi lyöpii trommin päälle ja koko maailma pauhaa. Thank you. And that's me finished.
Super. Marja, thank you so much. Absolutely illuminating. And it's so interesting to hear about all of this source material. And the bridge between Baroque and folk. I mean, it's It's so close, isn't it, actually, when you go back into the early Baroque period?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes, thank you for taking us through it. I know you said you played your last tune for the evening, but we may have to revise that because actually I
Oh,
think we haven't had that many questions. And actually, I think my feeling is from looking at the feedback so far that people would like to hear you play more if you have something up
oh.
your sleeve. So perhaps I can ask you some questions, and maybe during that you have a bit of time to think about what you might play next, if that's okay.
Okay, so let's talk in more playing. Yeah, I hear you.
Thank you. So actually, the first question is, I'm curious as well. Actually, what do you listen to?
um, very little of anything, to be honest. I listen to whatever I have to play next. So what I've listened to this spring the most, if I'm perfectly honest, I put a lot of preparation into the concert I did in the NCH with the Vamberos. I was listening to, very uncharacteristically for me, I was listening to Dvorak and Brahms. And I've been very lucky to work with David Power, the amazing uilleann pipe player, and John Walsh, the flamenco guitarist. And we've done a few online gigs this spring, so I've also been listening to loads on my phone, the little recorded bits of the various reels that David wanted to include for our sets. So that's what I've been listening to. What do I love? Anybody who knows me knows I've been a big Queen fan, not just since the film, but since my teens. And actually, the last 2 days I've been listening to Bohemian Rhapsody non-stop because my 4-year-old, youngest of my 3 kids, is absolutely mad into it. So that's what he wants to listen to. That's been my soundtrack. I love Russian gypsy music, and I love prog rock, anything kind of late 60s, early 70s in particular. And I also love romantic opera. And my CD in the car lately has been the Madrigal Mystery Tour by King's Singers, which I think is an absolute classic. All my kids love it as well. So that's a short answer.
Thank you. That's an eclectic mix. I'd expect nothing less. Thank you so much. That's fascinating. Next question. So actually, we were sent this one by one of our friends, and she was wondering what's the difference between a violin and a fiddle. And that reminds me of a joke. I think the joke answer is it's the amount of beer that's been spilled on it.
I would not spill beer on any of my fiddles, and I've got lots of them. I don't think there's any difference. I actually often talk of fiddles in any context. I tell my students to tune their fiddle.
Yeah, it's kind of colloquial, isn't it? Rather than it being a different instrument.
Yeah.
So another question that's come in. Does the early Baroque have a place in pubs and taverns alongside folk music? Because it seems so closely connected. Do people do that? Is that a thing?
I'm not sure. I think it could be. When I was programming for the East Cork Early Music Festival, I think we had some club nights where we would actually play pieces from the Hibernian Muse with Emma Reedy and her friends, who've actually recorded it for I think for Lyric FM. So it would absolutely have a place in a pub. No problem. It would be easy to make happen.
Very good. Very good. And then the last question that we have. This is an interesting one. How do you teach improvisation?
That's a very good question. And something I'm actually very, very interested in and actually quite passionate about. I'm very lucky to have a teaching job in the CIT, or should I say MTU, Cork School of Music, and I try to do it at every level. I teach chamber music to the first year degree students, and usually we start with just free improvisation. There's some wonderful resources online, and I've been lucky to work with some very good improvisers when I've been working with Maya Homburger and Barry Guy. Really fascinating. I think it's an amazing classroom tool. When I teach beginners, I've got a few young students, I just try to make it into something we do. Maybe not every lesson we have to get through the degree, I mean the grade exams as well, but I try to do it as something very natural from the very first lesson. I try to get them all into fluent sight readers and stuff, we do little bits, listening and repeating playing little things by ear, and sometimes we improvise pieces where I'll say, okay, let's play in A major, and I'm gonna compose the first bar and you compose the next bar, so it's gonna start D D D. What do you think comes after that? And all my smallies and slightly bigger people are absolutely brilliant at this. They've got no fear. So I think if it's something that is there all the time, it should be fine. But I must say, all my degree students that I've done improvisation exercises with have always responded very well. And I think as a tool in teaching classical chamber music, it's fantastic because it really opens your ears. You can't just do your thing. You have to be very aware of what everybody else is doing as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I wonder if the ability to improvise and to deal with the unexpected in a situation, I wonder if that helps with performance anxiety in general. That would be kind of an interesting one. I don't know if there's a link there or not, but it strikes me you feel able to have a musical conversation in the moment or find your way out of something somehow, that perhaps that's an interesting avenue too.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. So if you have another tune for us, or if you'd even like to play again one of the tunes that you offered us earlier, I think that would be a really nice way to finish the evening. I've put you on the spot here. I'm so sorry.
What could I play? Let me think. Is there something nice I could play that I have handy? I can play a tune that I wrote. Is that good?
Brilliant. Yes, please.
Okay, so this is in the style of kind of Finnish Irish mazurka, maybe. I wrote this when I was young and foolish.
Marja, thank you so much. That's beautiful.
Thanks.
What a treat for us all. Thank you. So thank you to everyone who tuned in this evening, and thank you for sending in your questions and comments. Please join us next week at 7 p.m. on Tuesday for Baroque Behind the Scenes with cellist Aoife Nicatlius, who'll be taking us into her practice room and talking us through some of her techniques. We hope to see you then. Thank you and good evening.